The sea around the Flannan Isles was restless on the morning of December 15th, 1900. An infinite sheet of shifting grey, swallowing the horizon in cold, rolling waves. The steamer Outer cut through the water steadily, but its captain, Captain Holman, noticed something off long before anyone else did. He was standing on the starboard bridge, scanning the lonely cluster of islands ahead. Island Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles, a place known to sailors as the edge of the world. The lighthouse perched on its cliff like a white tooth jutting out of the earth, tall, rigid, unblinking. But today, something was wrong. Its light was dark, not dim, not flickering, fully dark. Holman frowned. The Flannan Isles lighthouse was supposed to be manned by 3 keepers at all times. In stormy weather, which the region was famous for, the light was their only signal of safety, a warning for ships to avoid the island's jagged teeth. Yet there it stood, silent, dead, empty. Holman wrote it in his logbook. He sounded the ship's whistle. He waited for a signal. Nothing. When the Outer reached Leith days later, Holman filed a formal report with the Northern Lighthouse Board. They sent a relief vessel, the Hesperus, captained by James Harvey, who was instructed to deliver supplies and check on the keepers. The ship left on December 26th, pushing through winter seas that rose like lead mountains. Even before they reached the Isles, the men on deck felt it. An uneasiness, a silence thicker than fog, a heaviness sitting atop the waves like something watching them. When Eilean Moor finally came into view, the sky had turned a pale, exhausted grey, and the lighthouse towered above the rocks like a monument to isolation. Harvey reached for his spyglass. No movement, no flag, no sign of the keepers. He signalled the landing platform. He blew the horn. Still nothing. By the time the Hesperus anchored offshore, tension among the crew was tight enough to snap. They lowered Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, into a small boat to row toward the island. Moore had been to Eilean Moor before. He knew the path, the stairway carved into the rock, the wind that whistled through the cliffs. But today, something was different. He later swore the island felt wrong from the moment he stepped onto it. The wind seemed muted, the gulls were absent, and the usual distant crash of waves felt muffled, as if the island were holding its breath. Moore climbed the stone steps to the lighthouse. The closer he got, the more his anxiety grew. The gate was closed, but the door was unlocked. He entered slowly, calling out, "Ducat, Marshall, MacArthur." Nothing but the echo of his own voice. Inside the kitchen, he found the first sign that something was deeply wrong. The table was set, plates on the surface, cutlery placed neatly beside them, cups arranged evenly. A half-eaten meal sat untouched, as though the men had risen mid-bite and never returned. A chair lay overturned on the floor. Moore's breath tightened. He moved deeper into the lighthouse, inspecting every room, every corner, calling their names with increasing desperation. He found the clocks, every single one, stopped at the same moment, frozen in time. The beds were neatly made. The oil room was full. The lamp was ready to be lit. Coats hung on the hooks, except for the oilskins belonging to 2 of the keepers. One coat remained, the heaviest one. The coat belonging to Donald MacArthur, the 3rd assistant, known for his temper, known for his fear of the sea. He never left without it. Moore felt a cold chill sink into his spine. Something had happened here. Something fast. Something that pulled all 3 men away at once. He ran back down the cliff path and signalled frantically for the captain. Soon, a team came ashore, combing the island from end to end, their boots crunching over the frost-covered grass. They found a single peculiar detail. The west landing platform had suffered damage. Ropes were torn, a crane's railings twisted, a box smashed apart. But the destruction made no sense. The recent weather had been mild, no recorded storms, no waves large enough to do this, and yet the destruction was unmistakable. When the search team reached the edge of the cliffs, the wind seemed to whisper through the chasms like distant voices. Some men later said they heard shouts in the wind. Others insisted it was the sea, echoing strangely. But the truth was unavoidable. The island felt hollow. One by one, the theories started forming in the minds of the rescuers. Perhaps the men were swept away. Perhaps they fell. Perhaps two went out to help the third during a storm. But then the weather records came in. There had been no storm at all. Not even light rain. Nothing that could explain overturned rocks, missing men, and twisted railings. The search team returned to the lighthouse. There, they found the logbook. Its last entries were bizarre. December 12th. Severe winds, stronger than anything I've seen in 20 years. December 13th. Storm continues. All three of us praying. Ducat quiet. MacArthur crying. MacArthur crying. A man known for fistfights. A man known to fear nothing. December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. But outside, weather reports showed perfectly calm conditions during those days. No storm, no wind, no reason for three lighthouse keepers to be terrified, praying or crying. And then, nothing. No final entry, no goodbye, no explanation, no trace of the men. The relief crew left the island shaken. The new keepers refused to sleep alone. They locked every door. They kept the lamps burning all night, not because protocol required it, but because the silence of the island crawled over their skin like invisible fingers. When the Hesperus departed, the men on board watched the lighthouse shrink in the distance, wishing they could shrug off the feeling that something ancient had happened there. Something older than the lighthouse, older than the island itself. Something that didn't want to be seen. And in that silent lighthouse, standing alone against the endless sea, the absence of three men felt heavier than any presence. A disappearance without footprints, without witnesses, without a storm. Just a cold island, an empty lighthouse, and a mystery that waited patiently in the fog. The Flannan Isles had claimed three men, and the ocean, for once, had no answers. Before their disappearance turned them into legends, into whispers carried by the wind around Eilean Moor, the three lighthouse keepers were simply men. Ordinary, hard-working men trusted with one of the most isolated posts in the British Isles. Understanding who they were is the first step toward understanding how impossible their disappearance truly was. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant keeper. At 28 years old, Thomas Marshall was the youngest of the trio. Quiet, methodical, almost obsessively careful with his routines, he kept the lighthouse log with strict precision. Every wick trimmed, every oil measurement exact, every storm documented with clinical detail. He was not the type to panic. He was not the type to break protocol. And he certainly wasn't the type to vanish without leaving behind a record. Yet it was Marshall's handwriting that filled the final, unsettling entries in the logbook. Severe winds. Sea wild. MacArthur crying. But these storms never existed, and Marshall was not a man prone to hallucination or exaggeration. In the weeks before the disappearance, Marshall had written to family about being uneasy on the island. Something about the constant wind against the stone unsettled him. Some nights, he claimed, It sounded like voices. His family dismissed it as isolation fatigue. But after December 1900, those voices would become a repeating theme among future keepers assigned to the island. James Ducat. The principal keeper, Ducat, was the oldest of the three, 43 years old, a father of four, and a veteran lighthouse keeper with more than 20 years of service. He was steady, stern, dependable. If anything went wrong, Ducat would not panic. He would act. One of the Hesperus crew members later described Ducat as the type of man who'd hold his ground in a storm, even if the sea was swallowing the rocks beneath him. He took pride in discipline, and his record reflected a man who followed every regulation to the letter, which made one detail of the disappearance especially disturbing. Ducat's oilskins, his foul-weather gear, were missing. His were the only sturdy, heavy set of the three. The other two men had normal oilskins, lighter, somewhat worn. But Ducat's were thick, new, and nearly impossible to forget. If Ducat left the lighthouse during dangerous weather, he would have worn them. But if he left in calm conditions without them, that choice makes no sense. Why would a seasoned keeper step outside into cold December winds without protection? Why would he leave the safety of the lighthouse at all? Unless something urgent, something immediate, forced him out instantly. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, MacArthur, 40, was not a full-time lighthouse keeper, but a relief man filling in for someone else that season. Unlike the calm, stoic Ducat and the disciplined Marshal, MacArthur was known for his fiery temper. He was a former soldier, strong, loud, confrontational, the type who jumped into bar fights and usually won. Among keepers, he had a reputation for bravery, even recklessness, which is why the most chilling log entry stands out. MacArthur crying. People who knew him insisted he had never cried in his adult life. Not during storms, not during injuries, not even at funerals. For him to be crying, something beyond human comprehension must have terrified him. And then there was the strangest detail of all. MacArthur's oilskins were still hanging inside the lighthouse. He had left the building without them. He had stepped into bitter winter wind wearing only indoor clothes. He had gone outside unprotected. MacArthur, the toughest of the three, went out into the cold as if ripped from the lighthouse by force or by fear. Their final day's letters recovered later revealed a subtle but noticeable tension among the men in the days before the disappearance. Ducat wrote to his wife saying he felt strange and on edge. Marshall confided in family that the island felt unnatural that month. Most troubling was an account from a passing ship days before the Arctur sighting. A sailor claimed he saw 3 figures on the west cliffs waving, though no distress signal was made. Were they signaling the ship or trying to warn it? Inside the lighthouse, the last recorded note described the storm stopping, the sea becoming calm. A final sentence: God is over all. This line confused investigators. Ducat was religious, but not the type to write devotions in the log. Marshall always wrote strict, factual observations. MacArthur rarely wrote log entries at all. So who wrote it, and why? It felt like a final message, a sign that something had ended, or something had begun. The biggest mystery of all: why were all 3 men outside at the same time? Lighthouse protocol strictly prohibited this. One man must always remain inside. Always. Except, in this case, no one did. 3 disciplined, experienced men broke protocol. 3 men walked out into the cold. 3 men never returned. The image of their 3 empty oilskin hooks, 1 missing, 1 taken, 1 untouched, haunted every man who entered that lighthouse afterward. because it told a story without words. They left together. Whatever made them leave was powerful enough, urgent enough, terrifying enough to override training, logic, and instinct. Something called them out of the lighthouse, and none of them ever came back. The moment the relief crew realized all three keepers were gone, the island transformed from a lonely outpost into an active crime scene. Captain Harvey ordered every man who could walk to begin searching, splitting into teams and fanning out across the bare, rocky terrain of Eilean Moor. The island was small, barely 43 acres, a place where you could see nearly everything from the lighthouse tower. If 3 full-grown men were here, Harvey muttered, we should be able to find them within minutes. But minutes turned into hours, hours into a full day, and the island remained empty. The West Landing platform. Most of the clues pointed toward the western landing area, the most treacherous side of the island, where the sea smashed against the cliffs with enough force to shake the ground. Here was where the team found destruction. Ropes torn from their hooks, a wooden storage box splintered, crane rails twisted like soft metal. A large rock had been wrenched from its resting place and rolled several meters. But the conditions that day were calm. The weather reports from that entire week were calm. The waves that caused this had to be massive, freakish anomalies. But then a troubling detail emerged. The ropes weren't torn by waves. They were torn upward, not downward as seawater would do. The damage didn't match natural forces. It matched something pulling, yanking, or dragging. The more the rescuers looked, the more disturbing the sight became. If a wave swept the men away, why was there no blood, no torn clothing, no footprints leading near the edge? And then came the strangest discovery. The footprints simply stopped. They led toward the cliffs and ended on solid rock where no wave could reach them, almost as if the men walked to the edge or were taken and vanished into thin air. Inside the lighthouse, back inside the lighthouse, investigators tried to reconstruct the final moments of the keepers. They noticed something unsettling. The beds were untouched, as if slept in once and never again. The kitchen dishes were clean, except for the unfinished meal. The lamps were fully prepared for lighting the evening of December 15th. The gate was closed, the door unlocked. The fire in the stove had gone out days earlier. Everything suggested the men left mid-task, not because of an emergency inside, but something outside demanding their collective attention. What could force all 3 men out at once? Not a storm. They recorded calm seas in the final entry. Not an accident. Protocol required 1 man to stay behind. Not panic. There was no sign of distress, no damage inside. The lighthouse was eerily still, like it had paused itself the moment the men disappeared. The island's geography, a dead end. Eilean Moor is a strange, isolated mass of cliffs and slopes. There are no trees, no shelter, no hiding places, just open rock and grass. A body lost on the island should be easy to find. A body lost to the sea should wash ashore within days. But neither happened. Harvey ordered his men to check every crevice, every edge, every drop-off where a body could fall. They lowered ropes into ravines, crawled along ledges, scanned the waves for hours. Nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no bodies, not even debris that might indicate a fall or accident. It was as if the island had swallowed the men whole. Theories begin and fail when the Hesperus returned to the mainland. The Northern Lighthouse Board launched an official inquiry. They began constructing theories, each one more fragile than the last. Theory 1. A rogue wave. A massive wave might have hit the West Landing, sweeping the men away. The problem? There were no storms. The sea was calm. The damage didn't match wave force. Ducat and Marshall had oilskins, but MacArthur didn't. Why would he go outside unprotected? Most importantly, waves don't erase bodies. Islands like this return victims quickly. No bodies ever surfaced, and the footprints ending abruptly on dry rock made no sense. Theory 2. Murder-suicide one man killed the other two, then threw himself into the sea. But no blood, no signs of a struggle, no weapon. Why would MacArthur leave without his coat? Why would experienced keepers break protocol and leave together? This theory collapsed immediately. Theory 3. All three were pulled out by equipment. An accident involving ropes or machinery dragged them into the sea, but the crane was intact. The ropes didn't show tension burns, and again, the footprints ended. They didn't drag. Nothing was pulled. Nothing was dragged. Nothing was caught. Theory 4. They ran towards something. This is the theory that frightened investigators the most. It suggests the men left the lighthouse because something, or someone, approached the island. Something strange enough to make them forget protocol. Something urgent enough to go outside without their protective gear. Something terrifying enough to make MacArthur, the bravest, cry. But what arrived on that lonely rock, in the dead of winter, in the middle of a calm sea? No ship was recorded. No storm was present. No signals were sent. No witnesses saw anything. Yet something pulled three trained men from their post. The most disturbing discovery: investigators found one final detail that rarely makes the official summary. A lifebuoy was missing. One of the strongest, heaviest buoys, strapped high on the cliffs, had been torn loose, but the rope hadn't snapped. It had been unthreaded, as if a human hand had released it. Why would keepers remove a lifebuoy during calm weather? Why was there no sign of where it went? And why was the line released so carefully, while everything else on the landing platform looked violently disturbed? This contradiction broke investigators. This was not an accident, not a storm, not a wave. It was something else, something still without a name. By the time the full search ended, one conclusion echoed among the men. The keepers didn't die on the island. They didn't fall from the cliffs. They didn't drown in the waters. They simply vanished, without a trace, without a scream, without a single clue left behind. And with the island searched top to bottom, the investigation had nowhere else to go. The sea offered no answers. The island offered no answers. And the lighthouse itself, silent, cold, still, kept the truth locked inside its stone walls. When official investigators reviewed the lighthouse logs and interviewed the families of the missing men, a disturbing picture began to form. One built not on physical evidence, but on human behavior, fear, and three men reaching their breaking point. This segment focuses on the last known actions of the keepers, the emotional clues left behind, and the unsettling possibility that one of them sensed the end coming. The three keepers, a psychological profile. The keepers stationed at Flannan Isles were not amateurs. They were handpicked for their discipline, endurance, and calmness. Yet each of them carried fears and pressures most people never knew. 1. James Ducat, the principal keeper. A quiet, methodical man, respected, reliable, rigid. He followed rules to the letter. If a storm was coming, he prepared early. If something was wrong, he noted it in the log. But his final entries changed. They felt rushed, shorter, less detailed, almost as if something shook his internal order, or he no longer had time to write. 2. Thomas Marshall, second assistant, the anxious one. He was once fined for losing equipment during a storm, an event that scarred him mentally and financially. Investigators believed he lived in constant fear of another catastrophe. This made his final entries even more alarming. Severe winds, stronger than I have ever seen. Ducat quiet. MacArthur crying. These statements made no sense. There were no storms that week. So why was Marshall describing violent winds that never existed? Was he hallucinating from stress? Or did he witness something unusual and describe it the only way he could? 3. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, the toughest of the three, a war veteran, a brawler, a man who settled disputes with fists, not words. Yet in the log, Marshall writes, MacArthur crying. Investigators struggled with this. MacArthur was known as fearless. What could reduce him to tears? Fear powerful enough to break a soldier's composure meant something deeply unnatural was happening on the island. The final log entry. The last entry is chilling in its simplicity. December 15. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. This makes the mystery deeper. If the weather was calm, confirmed by mainland reports, then why did Marshall write about catastrophic storms? Some theories suggest the men witnessed something they interpreted as a storm. Rumbling ground, shaking structures, strange lights, roaring sounds from below the cliffs. Something no one else could confirm. A phenomenon isolated to the island. Something that ended abruptly. The final line, God is over all, sounds less like a routine note and more like a statement from a man witnessing something he couldn't understand or feared would kill them. The door that was left open. Despite their fear, the keepers left the lighthouse together and in a rush. Investigators were puzzled by the state of the entrance. The outer door was closed. The middle door was wide open. The inner door was partially shut. This strange alignment gave the impression the men didn't consciously lock up. They left mid-action, as if something outside demanded their attention instantly. No signs of panic, no overturned chairs, no damage inside, just an interrupted exit, and a sense that they intended to return, but never did. The missing oilskin, one of the biggest psychological clues. MacArthur left without his coat. He would never step outside coatless in December unless he believed he was stepping out for a few seconds. Something urgent grabbed his attention. He followed the others without thinking. This implies Ducat and the Marshal went out first, wearing their coats. MacArthur stayed behind, maybe cleaning up, maybe writing a note, maybe tending to the fire. And then something outside startled him enough that he ran out half-dressed. This is not the behavior of men responding to a slow-building emergency. It's the behavior of men reacting to a sudden event, something that hit them instantly, something unexpected, something powerful enough to override their training. The silent panic theory. Investigators later theorized the three men may have experienced what psychologists call shared hysteria or collective fear response. But the problem? There was no trigger for such panic. No storm, no intruder, no signal. Unless the trigger was something the logs only hinted at. Strange noises, sudden tremors, lights on the horizon, unexplained booming from the cliffs, or a presence they couldn't identify. Whatever they saw or heard it made Ducat quiet Marshall terrified MacArthur cry. This is not normal fear. This is life-ending fear. The final moments reconstructed. Based on behavioral clues, investigators believe the men's last hour went something like this. 4:45 p.m. Marshall hears or sees something outside, something alarming enough to interrupt his tasks. 4:50 p.m. Ducat joins him at the entrance, likely telling him not to panic. They put on their coats. 4:55 p.m. They step outside to investigate. 5 p.m. Inside, MacArthur notices something is wrong. The others haven't returned. He hears something, possibly shouting. He rushes out without his coat. 5:05 p.m. Whatever they encountered, on the cliffs or near the landing, was overwhelming enough that none returned. Not even to send a distress signal. Not even to grab gear. Not even to lock the door. It overtook them instantly. What happened next remains unknown, but the psychological evidence suggests one terrifying conclusion. The keepers didn't simply vanish. They were confronted by what? Nature, something human, something else entirely. That leads us to the final chapter. Even after weeks of searching, dozens of interviews, and multiple official inquiries, the disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers refused to fit into any normal explanation. No bodies, no equipment, no signs of struggle, no communication sent. 3 experienced men simply gone. Into air, into sea, or into something investigators could not define. This final segment explores the strongest theories ever proposed, the holes in each one, and the disturbing truth that no explanation fully fits the evidence. The official theory: the killer wave. The Northern Lighthouse Board eventually settled on a simple explanation. A rogue wave, an enormous wall of water, swept the men off the western cliffs. But problems appear immediately. 1. Why were all 3 men outside? Protocol required 1 man to stay inside at all times. Yet all 3 coats were gone except MacArthur's, implying either all 3 broke rules at the same moment, or something urgent forced them out together. 2. Why were 2 sets of gear missing? If they were checking damage during a storm, only 2 needed to go. 3. No storm existed that week. Weather reports from nearby stations reported clear skies and calm waters. A rogue wave can occur without a storm. Yes, but a rogue wave large enough to sweep away 3 men. Extremely rare, almost unheard of at that location. 4. The logs mention storm conditions that never happened, meaning either the men were lying, Marshall was hallucinating, or they witnessed something else entirely. The official wave theory explains some physical evidence, but not the psychological terror or the bizarre entries. Even today, oceanographers admit there is no wave model that fully explains the Flannan case. The murder theory. Some speculated 1 man killed the others. Usually MacArthur is blamed. The temper, the soldier background, the aggressive reputation. But again, problems. There were no signs of a fight, no blood, no broken furniture, no damage, no weapons missing, no footprints or drag marks outside. And if a murder happened inside, why were the logs normal until the end? And the biggest flaw, where would MacArthur go? There was nowhere to escape. No boats missing, no way off the island. The murder-suicide theory collapses on simple logic. The supernatural theories. Locals had their own explanations, whispered ones. Island Moor, they said, was not empty. It was a place the old Celtic clans once feared. A place of spirits and curses and things that walk the cliffs at night. Newer reports came from sailors. Strange lights floating above the lighthouse. A low droning sound. Sudden fog figures, seen moving on the cliffs, when no keepers were officially outside, green flashes beneath the water. Investigators ignored these stories, but in the official logs from the ship, Archtor, the one that first noticed the dark lighthouse, there is an unusual note. We saw a glowing shape near the western landing. This entry exists, but was dismissed as a trick of distance. To this day, some believe the keepers encountered something ancient, or something that wasn't human. The folklore theory. The seamen Old Hebridean legends speak of shape-shifting beings called blue men or storm men, said to cause shipwrecks, luring sailors into the sea by mimicking human cries. The logs describing crying severe winds. Unseen voices, vanishing waves match eerily well with these stories. These tales are superstition, not fact. But in a place as harsh and isolated as the Flannan Isles, superstition becomes survival. The geological theory, the island moved. Modern researchers have proposed something new. The island itself shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The Flannan Isles sit on a volatile section of seabed. Microquakes, ground vibrations, and sudden booming noises are common. Some scientists suggest that a sudden tremor, a wave amplified by underground structure, or a ground collapse near the landing could have created a thunderous noise, sudden shaking, a flash or burst of water, and a rapid change on the cliffs. This could explain Marshall thinking a storm was happening, MacArthur running out coatless, all three being at the same location. A silent disaster with no surviving evidence. But still, why no bodies? The ocean should have returned something, unless the men were caught in a fissure, trapped underwater, or pulled into a cave system. This theory partially fits, but still lacks a clean, definitive answer. The true ending, nothing fits perfectly. This is the enduring horror of the Flannan Isles. Every theory works, a little, but none work all the way. The wave explains the physical clues, but not the psychological ones. The psychological ones explain the logs, but not the disappearance. Folklore explains the fear, but not the missing coats. Science explains the vibrations, but not the vanished bodies. The case remains officially unresolved. The lighthouse was automated in 1971, and no keeper has lived there since. Today, sailors still report lights on the cliffs, voices carried by wind, the lighthouse glowing at odd hours, and occasional shadows moving where no one should be. Some say the keepers never left. Their final moments echo across the island, caught in a loop of fear and confusion. Even now, when storms roll in and the wind begins to howl across the rocks, locals whisper the same phrase: the island remembers, and it is waiting for its next witnesses.